Do you guys ever just like wake up and then realize that we're slowly becoming a theocracy? Because yeah, that happens quite a bit for me. Hi, I'm here. Whenever I make coffee at home, it either turns out too bitter or like not strong enough because like something's wrong with the temperature of my water. I suck at making coffee. I'm also a barista on the side, so we're just gonna gloss over that and get into the main point of this video. Christianity. It's everywhere. If you live in the South, like me, chances are you probably have like 20 First Baptist churches in your city alone. It's not an uncommon sight. One fun fact about the city of Charlotte is that we have this guy uptown. His name's Sam. I know this because I've had the pleasure, might I add, of interacting with him. That was sarcasm. It wasn't a pleasure. He was actually at the insurrection, a topic I might get into in a different video, but like, yeah, no, Charlotte is very much smack dab in the Bible Belt. We got Elevation here. We have Freedom House, which was frequented by our favorite person, Candace Owens. A lot of good stuff happening in Charlotte. Today, I want to talk about the topic of American Christianity. Specifically, how weird the sect of Christianity is getting here in the United States. Before we go on any further, I think it would be important to first define what American Christianity is, because Christianity is a very vast religion. There's no one single school of thought. There are so many different branches and splits and fractures and all that good stuff. In the United States, up until around the mid-20th century, there's this very distinct split of Protestant churches, Catholic churches, Orthodox churches, and everything else, which includes Mormon, or the Church of Latter-day Saints, which are Mormons, Adventists, all that good stuff. Evangelicalism has a very long and nuanced history, but it arose out of the South, primarily from Baptist and Pentecostal churches. People like Billy Graham were the ones who spearheaded this, with this idea of being a quote-unquote born-again Christian, referencing a passage from the New Testament where Jesus tells someone that they must be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven. Kristen Kobedumez, who's a professor of gender studies at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, wrote this really awesome book I highly encourage anyone interested in the topic recommend reading, called Jesus and John Wayne. It basically serves as a history of evangelicalism, but more specifically, of how evangelicalism rose in the United States and got intertwined with toxic masculinity to where we are today. When I say American Christianity, I'm not referring to all Christian denominations within the United States. Rather, I'm referring to white evangelicalism, the primary manifestation of Christianity here in the United States. The Public Religion Research Institution, for example, found that a majority of Christians in the United States are white evangelical Protestants, followed by white mainline non-evangelical Protestants. This first category basically refers to all churches that aren't part of a traditional sect. So primarily mega churches, non-denominational churches. These are all would be referred to as evangelical churches. Following that, we have the white mainline but non-evangelical Protestants. So from here, you have the Baptists, you have the Presbyterians, you have the Methodists, you even have a small percentage of Anabaptists. Like, you have all of that under this umbrella. Some of these churches are politically progressive, but a lot of them tend to be politically conservative. The more politically conservative would tend to be Baptist churches, PCA churches, and a few other smaller denominations. And following that, you have the rest of the categories that make up the United States religious population. There are white Catholics, Orthodox Christians, Black Protestants, Hispanic Protestants, all who typically have different traditions and different histories, but definitely compose a smaller portion compared to white evangelical Protestants. So the point of me providing all this information is to tie back to politics, because that's kind of the main point of this video. So following the 2020 presidential election, the Pew Center for Research did a lot of research on Christian votes for the presidential elections. What they found was that 85% of white evangelical Protestants voted for Trump, as opposed to the 14% who voted for Biden and the 1% who just, stayed out of the shit show that's American politics. Or voted independent. If you're an evangelical voting for Jill Stein, I genuinely want to have a discussion with you because that's so interesting. But besides that, white Protestants who weren't evangelical were pretty much evenly split between Trump and Biden. And then white Catholics, once again, mainly voted for Trump, but not as large of a margin as white evangelicals. Okay, so we've established that white evangelicals are the majority of Christians in the United States. We've also established that a majority of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump in the previous election. Why does this happen, and why does this matter? Well, in order to figure out the first question, why this happens, we need to look at a quick history of American Christianity. Our country has seen a number of religious revivals, some before the country was even formally formed. There's the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, the Businessman's Revival, and some argue the whole evangelical movement was sort of a religious revival. The evangelical movement in particular was spearheaded by people like Billy Graham and focused on evangelizing to other people, spreading the gospel, telling them the good news, invading their country and taking their resources and colonizing them. All peachy, great stuff. And because this movement grew so rapidly and so many churches joined evangelicalism, there grew to be a very sizable portion. So what happens now, conservative politicians notice this sort of trend in the evangelical sphere specifically, that there were a lot more traditional and conservative values among evangelical Christians. From this came the idea that evangelicals could be mobilized as a voting bloc. So conservative politicians in Washington started to notice this pattern of conservative values within the evangelical movement, specifically the white evangelical movement. Kristen Covey-Dumez puts it like this in the introduction to Jesus and John Wayne. Although foundational to white evangelical identity, race rarely acts as an independent variable. For conservative white evangelicals, the good news of the Christian gospel has become inextricably linked to a staunch commitment to patriarchal authority, gender difference, and Christian nationalism, and all of these are intertwined with white racial identity. Many Americans who now identify as evangelicals are identifying with this operational theology, one that is Republican in its politics and traditionalist in its values. This marriage of white American evangelicalism and American politics kind of came to a head in the 1960s with the civil rights movement. As it became more obvious that civil rights would be enacted, a majority of white evangelicals learned to concede and eventually moved past that, attaching themselves to an entirely different issue within the conservative sphere. Conservative evangelicals joined conservative Catholics in attaching themselves to the political issue of abortion and women's reproductive rights. From the 1970s onwards, this kind of became the main unifying thing for conservative evangelicals. In the more recent decades, we've obviously continued to see abortion be a major issue with the evangelical right, in addition to LGBTQ plus rights, immigrant rights, all these other things have been tacked on to the Christian right, so to speak. But it's important that we remember that the evangelical movement began its political career centered around segregation, not repealing segregation, but trying to keep it fully alive. So fast forward to today, where we have this thing called Christian nationalism, which is being talked by everyone except your grandmother, because she's probably too busy watching Tucker Carlson contemplate his bowel movements. Christian nationalism, basically defined, is this idea that the United States was founded on Judeo-Christian principles and is a state that somehow wandered away from God and needs to come back to the God of the Old/New Testament. Now, need I say any more? All this is complete bullshit. The writers of the United States Constitution were inspired heavily by the French Enlightenment, which was full of deists, not Christians. In addition to that, black people were enslaved, women were disenfranchised, there was a clear patriarchy in place. Are you saying that these are all values of the Bible? Because if so, I don't want to be part of your religion. The problem with this is that we're starting to see this ideology emerge within evangelical leaders and ultimately the Republican Party. Meet Joel Webbin, who's a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist and was one of the other cookie-cutter Matt Walsh copycats on the internet. In an interview a few weeks ago, Joel Webben basically said that women shouldn't be allowed to vote because the United States needs to have strong households as defined by the Bible.
If we had a Christian nation and women could vote, then within 50 years, we would no longer have a Christian nation. God has not designed women for warfare. And that's part of what politics is. It's really all that politics is. It's war without the blood.
His train of thought is that the Bible is the ultimate law of the land, meaning that all of our laws should be derived from the Bible. The problem with that is that it's not the law of our land. We're a multifaceted, separated state and religion country. And the issue with this is that Christian nationalists are actively trying to compromise that. This is why so many people are leaving the church, because they're seeing what's happening with Christians who are attempting to legislate morality through a government. And oftentimes this morality is restrictive, it's patriarchal, it's racist, it's homophobic, it's all these awful things that have caused so much harm in the past. In addition to Joel Webben, we can see this throughout so many different pastors in the country. For example, here's this one pastor in Charlotte who's saying that we're a godless country.
People of this world are blind, they are dead, their world is dark, it is immoral. They that have been born of Christ have gotten vision, they've received an understanding. That's why they're so disturbed to see what's going on in this world. I'm disturbed at what's happening. When I hear and see and read of the liberal policies, I'm just talking about the United States right now, such godless, dark, liberal policies that now govern this country. I am in shock that God has not already destroyed us. This whole gender thing is evil. It's a joke. Are you hearing me? Gender, how can there be any confusion about that? But evil people moved in and without any permission whatsoever, strong-armed the school system and the educational process.
His main claim is that we need to return back to our quote-unquote Christian roots, or we just need to wait for the rapture. That's another very big thing that Christian nationalists are eager on. It's this idea that like our nation's failing and we can try to save it, but ultimately it's all going to go to shit and the rapture is going to happen and all Christians are going to be raptured while everyone else is left to basically face the apocalypse. And this also ties into why American evangelicals are so pro-Israel. American evangelicals are so concerned with like preserving this quote-unquote biblical ethic that they're doing everything they can to legislate it into existence. In reality, the Bible says nothing about abortions besides instructions on how to provide one in the Old Testament. What is said in the New Testament by God incarnate is feeding the poor, something that conservative evangelicals have voted multiple times against on the basis that it's quote-unquote socialist. Jesus is also very clear about welcoming a stranger, something once again we're seeing from both parties now, something that's not a priority. It's also advocated multiple times in the book of Acts that everyone lived in a communal society, which kind of disregards the whole idea of capitalism. Not to mention the whole fact that Jesus literally gave away free healthcare, gave away free food, was like practically the antithetical or the complete opposite of capitalism. He flipped over tables. He did all these things that were anti-capitalist, yet somehow conservative evangelicals maintain this very rigid interpretation of the Bible that aligns very closely with Republican politics. Why am I going so fast? Why am I so worked up about this? Oh my god. I have like a psychiatrist appointment in 40 minutes and it's like a 25-minute drive, so I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. One of the big problems in our country when it comes to this whole idea of religion is the fact that conservative evangelicals have married a political system that aims to destroy anybody who doesn't think like this. There are Christian nationalists out there that have publicly stated it's their job to make America a Christian nation, to repeal anything that doesn't quote-unquote resemble Christianity. So by default, it's Islamophobic, it's phobic of all other religions, including agnosticism, atheism, lack of belief. And this is part of the reason why so many people are leaving the church, as shown in studies from the sources I mentioned previously. It's a culture that uses fear to keep people in, uses differences to antagonize people who are within the cult against people who are outside the cult, and basically aims to either Christianize the savages or else kill them, but not with kindness, like actually kill them. We're seeing this happening right now in Gaza with Zionist colonizers. But it's not all bad news, because there is light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. There are many American sects of Christianity that are fighting against this in coordination with agnostics, atheists, people who don't believe in a higher power, but also people who are Christians and people who are part of other religions that see this threat to this theocracy that's looming above us. I guess like the best way to end this video is that we all need to be really aware of who we're electing, even if we don't agree with a lot of their policies. I'm looking at Kamala right now, like, oh my god. But also fostering a greater understanding of how we can be allies to marginalized communities who have been hurt by the evangelical church. Our black and brown neighbors, our queer neighbors, our immigrant neighbors, our neighbors who don't think like us, all these people, we need to be there for them, and we need to understand them. We need to sit down and listen to them, to listen to the ways that they've been hurt, marginalized, and just outright exploited by American evangelicals, because it's happened in the past, and it's going to continue to happen if we continue to give in to this whole voting scheme. So to close out this video, I just kind of want to leave everyone watching with two things. There's hope for us at the end of this tunnel, that we're not become a theocracy, because we can be aware of who we're voting for. We can be aware of the principalities and the powers that are basically trying to manipulate religion and get us to vote for conservative candidates. And number two, it's imperative that we don't let people like this make decisions for the rest of us who aren't Christian or evangelicals. Collectively, we have the power to fight back against authoritarian and theocratical ways of thinking. America is not a perfect country. It hasn't been a perfect country, and it never will be a perfect country. But we sure as hell can make sure it doesn't get to that fucking level. Sorry for my impassion. I'm Julia. I have a psychiatrist appointment. I'm gonna see you guys next time.